I said I've never seen such hideousness in all my life.
There's a lot of this,
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Like a furry torpedo to the jugular. This is Honey Badger Radio. Radio with bite.
Talking about men's rights? What do you mean men are human?
What do you mean there are men's human rights issues? How dare you talk about these things? Who do you think you are?
I'm a bad pussycat.
I think I might have been in high school the first time I was told the starfish analogy, probably by someone who didn't know its origins. The analogy captures some of the story from the original narrative, The Star Thrower, by Lauren Isley. The usual telling is of a man walking along a beach upon which the tide is stranding starfish. The man encounters another character, usually a younger man or a boy, throwing starfish individually back into the sea. He asks the youth what he's doing and why, and the youth explains that he's throwing the starfish back because the tide is going out, and if they're not returned to the water, they will die. The man points out that there are thousands of starfish along the beach surrounding them, and asks how the youth could possibly think he is making a difference. The analogy, told in motivational speech after motivational speech, always ends with the youth throwing another starfish into the sea while explaining, "It made a difference to that one." It can be motivational the first time you hear it, and it's not wrong to point out that even the smallest of gestures can make a difference. But it wasn't quite how or where the story went. Isley's narrative was not just about one person's ability to make a difference, but about the redemption of a man who had descended into a kind of despondent apathy. The essay is 16 pages long, with only a bit of that dedicated to the star thrower on the beach. It starts with a description of the scene, including professional shellers whose role in the story never makes it into that motivational analogy. Isley writes,
I concealed myself beneath a fisherman's cap and sunglasses so that I looked like everyone else on the beaches of Costabel, which are littered with the debris of life. There, along the strip of wet sand that marks the tide, death walks hugely and in many forms. The sea casts them repeatedly back upon the shore. The tiny breathing pores of starfish are stuffed with sand. The rising sun shrivels their unprotected bodies. The endless war is soundless. Nothing screams but the gulls. In the night, torches bobbing like fireflies along the beach are the sign of the professional shellers. Greedy madness sweeps over the competing collectors, hurrying along with bundles of gathered starfish that will be slowly cooked and dissolved in the outdoor kettles provided by the resort hotels for the cleaning of specimens.
Next, Isley describes his encounter with the star thrower, who is further along the beach. As in the motivational analogy, he finds him examining the unfortunate creatures for signs of life, then gently tossing the live ones back into the sea in the hope that they won't end up back on the beach again. The description subtly offers a hint to the impression the star thrower makes.
In a pool of sand and silt, a starfish had thrust its arms up stiffly and was holding its body away from the stifling mud. It's still alive, I ventured. Yes, he said, and with a quick yet gentle movement he picked up the star and spun it over my head and far out into the sea. It may live if the offshore pole is strong enough, he said. In a sudden embarrassment for words, I said, Do you collect shells? Only ones like this, he said softly, gesturing amidst the wreckage of the shore, and only for the living. He stooped again and skipped another star neatly across the water. The stars, he said, throw well. One can help them. He looked full at me with a faint question kindling in his eyes.
Embarrassed for words, or, in a more modern phrasing, at a loss for them. Having just wandered through the ranks of shellers plundering the beach for these same creatures, only to kill them in boiling water for their marketable shells, the clearly jaded traveler is suddenly confronted with an individual whose behavior contradicts everything for which his current state of mind allows. The contrast between his internal bleakness and the vibrant demonstration of compassion upon which he has stumbled leads to cognitive dissonance and a sense of awkwardness. Isley's initial response to this, one that is all too common in the human animal, is to try to maintain his morose outlook.
No, I do not collect, I said uncomfortably, the wind beating at my garments. Neither the living nor the dead. I gave it up a long time ago. Death is the only successful collector. I nodded and walked away, leaving him there with the great rainbow ranging up the sky behind him. I turned as I neared a bend in the coast, and saw him toss another star, skimming it skillfully far out over the ravening and tumultuous water. For a moment, in the changing light, the sower appeared magnified with the posture of a god. But my cold, world-shriveling view began its inevitable circling in my skull. He is just a man, I considered sharply, bringing my thought to rest. The star-thrower is a man, and death is running more fleet than he, and along every sea beach in the world.
There is the sense of hopelessness, often described in motivational speeches, which Isley first attempts to maintain. This is followed by his return to the solitude of his room and the narrative of his own thoughts. The bulk of the story deals with this mental journey the star-thrower has set him on, taking him through childhood moments, aspects of humanity, the loss of his mother, man's relationship to other animals and the universe, science versus religion, and an eventual awakening, the understanding that what separates us from other animals is, in fact, our capacity to choose our view of the world around us, and our capacity to choose our impact on it. We have the power of premeditated, deliberate altruism.
On a point of land as though projecting into a domain beyond us, I found the star-thrower. In the sweet rain-swept morning, that great many-hued rainbow still lurked and wavered tentatively beyond him. Silently, I sought and picked up a still-living star, spinning it far out into the wave. I spoke once briefly. "I understand," I said. "Call me another thrower."
There are several lessons that can be taken from this story, not all of which are related to the men's human rights movement. The one most often taken isn't the one that stuck with me the first time I read it. It is not merely that yes, one person can make a difference, but that the difference you make is under your control. That seemingly tiny distinction is the seed of hope from which all activism stems. The realization that we do not have to be part of the problem, that we do not have to passively label the problem inevitable, and that we do not have to spend our lives treading water while the problem rolls over us time and again. We can, upon identifying it, take measures to mitigate or solve it. We can also take a lesson in the common oversimplification of Isley's story in motivational speaking. While assuring people of the difference their individual efforts can make is an admirable goal, it's not an end goal. It's a starting point. For instance, what if we compare this story to the field of medicine? We could say that oncologists are star-throwers, their careers dedicated to stemming cancer's deadly tide, one patient at a time. Their work is genuinely admirable, and the world would be a scarier and more painful place without them. There is no question that striving to treat cancer and extend the lives of patients under treatment for it is an admirable career. Still, we don't shame laboratory researchers who seek a cure for the disease because their work isn't the practice of cancer treatment. We don't consider charities that fund cancer treatment or research to be so detached from the patient as to be unhelpful. Nobody's suggestion that focus on prevention should be eliminated to redirect one's energy to treatment would be widely taken seriously. We value every effort that puts itself between humanity and death by cancer, just as starfish, were they similarly sentient, might value an inventor of a device to stop them from getting stranded on the beach in the first place, or the operator of one that would assist them in returning themselves to the sea whenever they find themselves out of water. Men's issues advocacy somewhat changes the story. We're starfish throwers on the same beach where the professional shellers bent on their harvesting oppose our efforts, all in the midst of a social storm that pounds men against the ground with punishing force. Still, we are not working with helpless, directionless creatures totally at the mercy of their environment and our intervention. Often they are going to pick themselves back up and move themselves back to where they need or want to be, and just need the right tools to accomplish that. Our best chance of lasting impact is to provide those tools, but also to strive to change the way the entire tide flows, to change the ratio of throwers to shellers on this beach, and to mentally arm the altruistic for defense against those shellers when they oppose such reforms. While individual men's situations matter, And individual men do need support. Until those things happen, the individual cannot be the focus of every individual thrower. If all we ever do is try to address individual circumstances one man at a time, we will lose dozens for every one we are able to help. And that help will diminish into nothing under the onslaught of a merciless tide of social attitudes, unfair law and policy, and the aggression of shellers whose livelihoods are threatened by our efforts. This is the breach into which the Honey Badger Brigade steps. We and others like us pursue strategy in our activism, in the hope of paving a way for social evolution. We fight the tide of apathy and antipathy faced by men and boys, hoping to make knowledge and understanding the men's rights movement's bulwark against hostility. We fight for a world that doesn't respond to compassion for men and boys as if it is madness or a sin. That is our motivation, the foundation of our mission, and the basis of our mission statement, which can be found at honeybadgerbrigade.com. Hello and welcome to HBR Talk 40, Badger Beginnings, Mission Imperative. I'm your host, Hannah Wallen, here with Badger-in-Chief, Alison Tiemann, she who must be obeyed, Karen Strawn, and that adorable specter of death, Prim Reaper, to talk about, well, why we're here. But before we get on to today's topic, the usual reminders are in order. If you're on YouTube and it starts experiencing platform malfunction syndrome and won't let you listen, we're also on Twitch and Facebook because you can't keep a good badger down. And if you want to be sure you'll always be able to catch our live streams, even if YouTube decides to throw us in the gulag for wrongthink, and they are doing that more and more, or if you want to catch our show in its audio format, remember to go to badgerfeed.com and register to receive notifications. And with that, I want to introduce Alison. She's going to say a few words about the mission statement before we get into the meat of the show, discussing the statement itself.
When I originally started Honey Badger Radio, I actually, and even when the mission statement itself was created, I had a perception that men's issues were a problem. My perception over the years has actually changed. I think they are what's pointing us to a solution. So those of us in the men's rights community, I don't think we actually are victims of men's rights issues or really have a problem with them. We are the ones that are actually recognizing a problem that the rest of society has chosen to ignore, and yet is indirectly or even directly facing the results of that problem. So in that kind of vein and context, I want to talk about an ancient king, and I'm going to mispronounce this. I know that Karen is going to correct me. It's not Pyrrhus. It's a Pyrrhic victory. How do you pronounce that word, Karen?
Pyrrhic?
Pyrrhic victory.
Pyrrhic
victory. Okay. Yeah. King Pyrrhus was one of the great would-be conquerors of Rome. And I can just hear French Honey Badger laughing at himself because I'm bringing up Rome again.
Of course.
It's always Rome with you, Alison.
It's always Rome. But King Pyrrhus is actually a really interesting character. He waited a great deal of his life to sort of step onto the stage. And he was a distant relative of one of Alexander the Great's successors. And he wanted more than anything to relinquish or rekindle Alexander's legacy and become a great conqueror. And that later in later age, he ended up getting the chance to, and the chance he was given was to go to Rome or to Italy and attempt to conquer the Romans. And he was having a discussion about doing this with his chief advisor, who was a man named Critias, I believe, or Critias. And Critias, who was more of a less of an optimist than Pyrrhus, said to Pyrrhus, "So what happens after you conquer Italy?" "Well, why? I'll conquer Sicily." "And what happens after you conquer Sicily?" "Well, I'll conquer Spain." And then he said, well, then what do we do after we conquer Spain?" "Well, then we'll take Egypt." And then he said, "Well, what happens after we conquer Egypt? Well, Critias, I guess we can just kick back and enjoy the evening sunset and drink some
Miller time.
Yeah, it's Miller time. We'll just kick back and enjoy the peace. And Critias said to him, what stops us from doing that now? But unfortunately, Pyrrhus was not dissuaded from his dreams of imminent glory. So he ended up invading Italy. And eventually he got it to the point, he managed to get Romans to the point where they were going to surrender to him. And it was Critias he sent to the Senate to negotiate the peace. And before Critias went to the Senate, he very wisely sort of meandered around in Rome, got in good with all the wealthy and influential families, and managed to get them to agree to this peace that Pyrrhus was offering. But when he got to the Senate, an old Roman senator who was totally retired. In fact, he was blind, sorry. He was blind and he wasn't even able to walk to the Senate. He got his sons to pick him up and carry him. He gave the Senate such a tongue lashing about surrendering when Rome was on its knees. So that's essentially what he said. You don't bargain for peace when you're on your knees. You don't bargain for peace from this inferior position. You'll never get peace that way. And then the Roman Senate, which was fired up by this, for whatever reason, Critias had his persuasive language had managed to convince them to the peace, but now they were fired up and they said, no, we're not going to accept a peace until Pyrrhus is out of Italy. And then they proceeded to do just that, to drive him out of Italy. When Critias went back to Pyrrhus to talk about this experience, he described the Roman Senate as a council of kings. I realized at some point that men's issues and men's rights activism is pointing the way to a new council of kings. Now, I don't know what form it would necessarily take. I don't know the people in it, but I believe that is the end of dealing with these issues, is going to be another new cooperative system in which men can retain a sense of independence, self-efficacy, self-determination. And we can have those kinds of Rome was characterized by incredibly ambitious, independent, driven men, and yet they were able to cooperate together in a way that was never before seen in human history. This was a council of kings. And the way that they did it, I actually believe, is pointed to by the issues that we talk about and we discuss right here in Honey Badger Radio. So that's that's what I'm looking at.
That's pretty optimistic, Alison.
Well, it's happened before, can happen again.
There you go. Well,
you keep talking about Rome this way, there will be people who will start calling you ambitious.
Yeah. We should probably change her little moniker at the intro to Hail Caesar or something.
I can start the shows with friends. I guess we'd have to say world
friends,
citizens.
Romans, countrymen.
You just have to say it, articulate it carefully, otherwise it sounds like you're asking people to turn their butts to you. Lend me your ears! No, wait!
Well, just in my defense, in the prior eras, the way that we had structured how our attitudes towards men essentially determined that there would be one man on top, a king, and every other man subjugated to him.
Every other man was the bottom.
Every other man was the bottom, and I see that a lot. And I think that's a manifestation of distrust between men and encouraging this kind of incredibly competitive hierarchies. Whereas if you can create that kind of a cooperative atmosphere, you can create the possibility of not having these ambitious, independent men fighting each other, but working together. And right. I think that's something that we need in this age to just maybe quell some of the competition.
I think that's primarily what brought us on this sort of experiment in, you know, that we call humanity. Is one of the primary ingredients of it has always been the cooperativeness of human men, right? So,
well, and cooperativeness and competition can actually go hand in hand.
Of course,
when you're competing for prestige in your achievements for your society, and that's something that's actually a positive thing. It's how we end up with great leaders. It's how we end up with, you know, people who invent things that move society forward in terms of evolution and everything else. It's a lot of times more dangerous leaders or bad leaders, whatever you want to say about them, tend to exploit male competitiveness in ways then that leads to men competing for dominance, and like not dominance on a, you know, sports level or dominance on a level of greatness, but killing each other for their country and so on.
Right.
Feminists would turn around and call that toxic masculinity, even though female leaders are known to be actually worse about it. They're more, in a lot of times, they're more willing to throw men's lives away in wars.
Europe's queens were. Europe's queens through history were 27% more likely to wage war than Europe's kings.
And the kings,
of course, they'll just try and minimize that by saying that, oh, there was fewer of them, so it's less bad in general.
And they don't think about the fact that the queens didn't ride into war with their soldiers, and kings did.
Elizabeth the First had armor, but it was decorative. It wasn't functional.
Yeah, that's so she was the first feminist Dungeons and Dragons complaint. She had armor that was not functional.
Well, it wasn't like Red Sonja or even Red Sophia from the Cerebus comics, Cerebus the Earth Pig, but so it wasn't a chainmail bikini, but.
Well, you know, the chainmail bikini exists because the women who wore it were so badass they didn't really need armor because nobody could touch them anyway.
There you go.
But, you know, feminists can't take that outlook either. In any case, I think we can probably go on to starting to read the mission statement.
Okay, so this is a thing that I wrote. I wrote it in response to, and these criticisms have come from a variety of people, and they essentially, I mean, they're still rolling in. I was just on YouTube today, and essentially, you know, somebody made the comment on some video somewhere, I forget which, saying, because I had left a comment, and in response to that comment, it was, well, all of the primary figures in the men's rights movement are women. No wonder we don't get anywhere, or whatever, right? Like, so essentially, it's like almost as if no matter what you do, and no matter, even though people understand what we're up against, they want to see progress, and they really want to see things happening. Like, so it's been 9 whole years since Karen Strawn started doing this. Why isn't there a men's domestic violence shelter on every corner? So, you know, because she should have been able to, you know,
oh my gosh,
make that happen, right? Like, it's like,
for Pete's sakes, you're just one person.
I know. Well, or, you know, the Honey Badgers, or A Voice for Men, or any of the organizations that actually do this. NCFM has been around since the 1970s, if I recall. They just had their 40th anniversary last September, and they haven't been able to make this stuff happen. And they have lawyers. They launch federal cases. They do a lot of stuff that you would think would result in actual change. They actually have set precedents that should change the way things are done, but don't always work out that way in practice. So, you know, like, we're constantly, I think, because there are so few of us and there's so little money floating around in this, right? I mean, you look at the National Organization for Women and their bank account and compare it to Honey Badger Radio. There's just no way whatsoever. So I wrote this because I was getting a lot of sort of accusations that instead of being spokespeople or commentators, instead of raising awareness, instead of devoting our time to creating content and doing research, we should be community workers and all of that. So I guess I should just start. So the Honey Badger Brigade is a team of men and women who are interested in promoting the interests of men and boys in a culture that has largely left them behind, and in opposing ideological feminism. We are content creators, artists, writers, animators, speakers, and commentators. Most of us are volunteers who believe the mission of broadening public awareness of the issues that affect men and boys is worth donating our time, our effort, our talents, and our dollars. That said, we are not a charity. While we accept donations and patronage from like-minded people who believe in the importance of our mission is to create content that our patrons believe is worth their hard-earned dollars. None of us are lawyers. None of us are psychologists. None of us are in a position to build shelters, provide crisis services, lobby governments, testify before Congress, or write legislation. We are here ultimately to spread a message to the public that such things are sorely needed and are not being done. We are here ultimately to educate the public that our society's view of gender relations is wrong-headed and destructive. We are here ultimately to create a climate in which compassion for men and boys ceases to be at best an alien concept and at worst harmful to women and girls. We are here ultimately to inform and to educate, to provoke thought and spur dialogue, to shove our foot in the doorway of the gender discourse and keep that door from slamming shut on groups like NCFM, CAFE, FACE, FIRE, SAVE, MHN, Women Against Paternity Fraud, Justice for Men and Boys, and others who are in a position to take advantage of shifting cultural attitudes in order to get brick and mortar advocacy work done. In the service of this mission, we write blog posts, share information, resources, network, make videos, produce podcasts, engage in discussions on mainstream forums, and give interviews to any media source that comes asking. We are content creators, and we want our content to enjoy the broadest possible reach so that the attitudes of the public change, and the next time a paternity fraud or alimony reform bill is introduced, politicians will have no choice but to support it. What we do takes a lot of time and effort, and none of us are independently wealthy. This is why Honey Badger Brigade needs to operate as a business. HBB was Alison's brainchild, and she puts in more work than any other member of the team. More than this, she performs the work that none of us would be willing to do, even if we were being paid. Stuffing envelopes, herding cats, ordering merchandise, taking minutes during meetings, and keeping track of everything. Once HBB had proven to be a growing concern, rather than a flash in the pan, we had to consider how to move forward in such a way that Alison was not at critical risk. In the beginning, HBB was essentially Alison, in the same way that Girl Writes What is Karen Strawn. But as the platform and the team grew, and as the revenue we were generating increased, it became clear that HBB being legally synonymous with Alison Teeman could not last. These problems were easier to deal with when we were a tiny channel with only a few contributors, but as it grew, we had to consider other strategies. If Alison wanted to compensate team members for their work, fund trips and events, or purchase necessary equipment for members of the team with HBB funds, HBB would be paying income tax as if it were Alison's individual personal income. The larger that income got, the higher the tax bracket, and the more money would go to Revenue Canada rather than to contributors. More than this, as long as HBB and Alison Teeman were legally synonymous, any actionable statement made by any HBB team member on any podcast could make Alison as an individual vulnerable to a lawsuit. as an individual rather than an enterprise, all of her assets and the assets she holds with her husband would be at risk. After much consultation between Alison and the primary contributing members of the team, it was agreed that HBB would go the route of incorporation. Incorporation protects Alison from undue legal and tax liability while also protecting staff and contributors from the kind of exploitation and profiteering common with nonprofits such as the SPLC and Feminist Frequency. It involves less red tape and fees while still promoting the generation of content through a legal mechanism to eventually pay our most consistent contributors for their work. We want this endeavor to become financially self-sustaining because we want to keep doing the work we do. We are grateful beyond measure to anyone who has contributed their time and talent to this enterprise, whether that's writing a blog post, hosting a weekly show, or creating a piece of fan art. It is our hope that one day some or all of our contributors will be able to be paid for their contributions because our platform and our reach will have grown to the point where advocacy for men and boys is mainstream, where it is no longer seen as strange or socially detrimental to stick up for our brothers, fathers, husbands, and sons. Until that day, we will continue to do what we do, create content as we can with the help of a host of talented and motivated people who are willing to, for the most part, donate their time and effort. With the help of a host of patrons who, for the most part, share our vision and are willing to put a portion of their money toward it, even if, or perhaps because, they can't support us openly without endangering their livelihoods. With the help of anyone who is willing to contribute anything in any way toward the forwarding of our mission. And our mission is to change the gender discourse so that the problems and issues of men and boys become visible to everyone. Our mission is to change the gender narrative so that compassion for men and boys is no longer an alien concept. Our mission is not to fund a domestic violence shelter for men. It is to help create a world in which such a shelter is no longer considered an oddity, let alone a crime against women. It is not to write a paternity fraud bill, but to help to create a world in which the public can understand that the success of such a bill is just and morally right. This is our mission.
So our situation, when we wrote this, we'd seen these kind of questions come up. When we've talked about our journey through Reddit and our various journeys prior to Reddit that led us to meeting each other. I personally have seen these kind of questions come up with regard to various issues under discussion forever. And seeing it happen again with the men's rights movement on Reddit, and then seeing it directed at us as we began discussing these issues, and then continually directed at us over and over again. Why aren't you solving all the world's problems in a nutshell right now by doing one thing? Seems to be the narrative. I was glad to see us put up a mission statement when we started the blog, and when we started doing more on YouTube and everything. This is why I wanted to discuss this. And we've actually, if you look back at some of the things that we've been involved in, we've actually gotten a few things done that people really maybe aren't as aware of the significance. For instance, our court case has already set one precedent, and it may very well set another one that's kind of vital. If you ask me anyway, it's quite vital to have a precedent in place that says if you sign a contract with a business entity, the business entity cannot then turn around and use your politics to declare the contract invalid without any stipulations in the contract against your politics. And that's kind of what happened with us at Calgary Expo. So when we're going to court in June, one of the things that we're hoping to establish is that contract law applies regardless of extenuating circumstances beyond the contract in terms of who the people are that you've signed a contract with.
In terms of personal belief.
Yeah, in terms of personal belief, in terms of, you know, what if you are of a religious mindset and you make a contract with a company to get something done or to do something together or to give you something or sell you something, and later on they find out your religious beliefs and they say, well, now we're not going to hold up our end of the contract. Or at the other end of it, you sign a contract with a religious organization and they find out you're an atheist. And all of a sudden, well, we don't have to hold up our end of the contract. You have to hold up your end of the contract, but we don't.
And we can lie about
it. And we can lie about it and lie about you publicly. It's a terrible thing to have in place. It's something that if that's allowed, nobody's contracts are secure, because the minute that somebody wants to get out of a contract, all they have to do is look into your history and find something, anything. It doesn't matter what it is, just anything that they can maybe object to, and turn around and say, well, you know, we don't like this person, so we don't have to hold up our end of the contract.
The whole notion is kind of ridiculous, even if you think about it. I mean, oh no, it's a group that loves and appreciates men. It's so terrible. We can't have this here. It doesn't make any sense. It's ridiculous.
Well, I think
you criticize women.
Oh, right, of course.
Yeah.
My bad.
It's because we criticize women, and we counter the prevailing narrative, which is extremely politically expedient in terms of, you know, narratives. You know, that the prevailing narrative of women as oppressed and men as this sort of privileged class of people, that gets a lot of stuff done. So
we can't have women not thinking they're oppressed now, can we?
Oh my God.
No.
That entire thing is just like, I just look at it and I think, you know, what a horrible message to, you know, it'd be one thing if it was true, and that's not me rustling a chip bag, Alison. That's my guy. He's eating pork rinds. But
I thought it was a dog shaking
itself. I thought it was a dog too.
No, the dog is actually sitting very still, staring at the pork rinds. But for once, but essentially, oh, now she's eating one. But essentially, what you have is this message that you're putting in women's heads, and then you're sending them out into the world. And I'm like, I think I said it to like the outsiders on Sky News, right? That can't be a very happy message to take out into the world every day. Is that everybody's against you and trying to hold you down and make, you know, get in the way of your success and all of that.
If you actually counter that message that women are victims of everything, then what you're saying is that women are responsible for things. So, for example, me and Mike recently did this poem where a woman said she was a victim of apparently birth control. And today I've received some more information through our Patreon Discord's Women Worsting channel that women are victims of roads.
What?
Yes. I don't know why this outrages anyone anymore.
The things you drive on, not the scholars.
Roads, literally roads.
Yes.
Yeah.
Roads designed by men are killing women.
What the hell?
Oh, well, they shouldn't jump down off of
And
buildings
also,
onto them.
It's because you know why? It's because they're called manholes, not person holes, and women think that they don't have to watch out.
All right,
there you go.
and girls are
for
also
manholes because they think women think that women can't fall in a manhole.
Well, you know, I just know that I hate it when I get stalked by a road and tracked down and assaulted, because that just, it ruins my whole day.
Hey.
Asphalted. All right. And also, I learned today that half of the world's out-of-school children are girls, which hits girls worse than boys. One half are girls. One half of the victims of something are girls, which means girls are more affected by that thing.
Yeah, I know. Every time I see something like that, you know, that worldwide there are 58 million children out of school, half of them are girls. I'm like, well, no, duh. Like, What would you expect to be different? Like, do you want them all to be boys? Like, yeah.
Well, that's if they were all
want?
boys, they wouldn't care. That's what they're admitting when they say this problem exists and X percentage of it are girls or women. Is we only care about this because it's also happening to girls or women. That's why they express 75% of suicides are men by saying 25% of suicides are women. Oh no,
Yeah,
it's homeless. 25% of homeless.
27% of the homeless are women. Yeah.
Well,
I've also learned that the nickname wifey makes women victims.
Really?
And also there was a man who was he allegedly, since they don't classify men killed by their in-laws as honor killings because it has to be their relatives. I don't know how in-laws became not relatives.
Yeah, but men get killed by their relatives
family.
too. No. Well, the way they've defined honor killings under the UN is specifically that based on the fact that females are required to maintain the honor of the family, and so essentially it is a crime that you can only do to women. It really is like femicide, right? It's something that can only be done to women. So, and then they say 98% of all honor killings are women. Well, like, I don't even know how that 2% of guys got in there, the way you've defined it.
Maybe when the woman's family members, or when his family members like her better and kill him to preserve her honor. I don't know.
Or like maybe he was dressed like a woman. He was dressed like a woman. Yeah,
that happens.
There was a recent honor killing in the news in which a man was killed, and I'm going to call it an honor killing because I don't think that this is legitimate, defining crime in such a way that only women are victims of it. That's totally illegitimate. So this man was honor killed, and then the article went on about how his death, the woman, essentially what happened is they were in a very conservative part of India. They eloped, got married, the man was killed, and the article went into great detail about how this represents sexual oppression of women and a lack of recognition of women's choice. Are you guys stunned? In stunned silence?
Yeah, a little bit. It's like, what the fuck? These guys can turn anything into how it affects women. Anything.
And if you disagree and if you argue back, you're of course putting response, because by definition, if women aren't a victim of something, then their actions have to be inserted somewhere in the picture. If you instead insert women's actions in there somewhere in the picture, or even challenge an allegation. I mean, in this case, we could say, well, but it was a man who was killed, and he was killed because her family didn't like him. And they were so-called preserving her chastity, but a man is dead at the end of the day. I think that should be the more salient factor that we take out of this situation. You point that out, you're a misogynist. If you point out that women actually have more control over their lives than feminists make it out to be, I mean, I do not think that women are victims of birth control, sperm banks, mathematics, roads, beavers, the way we view water lilies. I don't think women are victims of these things.
The dirt path on the side of the road.
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, a long time ago, I said to Karen, the way you can create any kind of feminism, all you have to do is just pick up a random object and describe how women are victims. That was a joke, but they made it true.
Yeah, feminists actually consider and base their narratives on the idea that women are victims of their own choices. They consider women victims of their own choices. So if a woman, for instance, decides she's going to go into a profession that has no prestige, I am what they just changed our title. Used to be called direct caregiver. I get 1 week less training in my original training than a state tested nurse's aide would get for what I do. And it's caregiving, the type of caregiving you do if you were raising kids, except it's more in an advisory capacity for adults with intellectual disabilities. And it's not a prestigious job. It is a very, very rewarding job, but it's not a prestigious job. It's not a high-paying job. I'm never going to be honored, in public for what I do, and I don't care that I'm never going to be. And it's not something that I do for any of those things. It's something that I do. It's very much like this. It's activism for me. And feminists would complain that I do not get paid the same as, say, a construction worker who works on roads and is separated from 65, 70 mile an hour traffic on the highway by traffic cones and risks his butt every day so that I can get to and from the meetings and educational things I have to go to for my job. I don't think that's a valid complaint, but they do.
It's not, but like as we've kind of seen, there are a lot of things that they say that aren't really valid complaints, like say the birth control thing. What you can do is you can just like not put it in your mouth or not go to the doctor and get it inserted inside you. You can do those things. I'm sure that men would love to have some more options to be oppressed by birth control. I'm sure that would go over just fine for a lot of guys. But yeah, ladies, you have the option to not do those things. It's okay, I promise.
Well, acknowledging that is the problem. If you had a situation where you had like a ridiculous internet prank where people just walk into a plank and they just nail a plank on a door about the height of their forehead and then just walk into it or even run into it, and you get women doing it, feminists would say that women are victims of planking culture. They would. And if you said, well, wait a second, that woman went to a hardware store, bought a plank and a hammer and some nails and nailed that plank up on her door, and maybe it's an interior door, and then chose to take a running leap into the plank and render herself unconscious, she chose all of that. You would be called a victim blamer.
She regretted it
called a victim blamer. Yeah, of course she regretted it afterwards.
Yeah, of course.
But you would be a victim blamer because you're saying, wait. All of these steps preceding the planking of this woman were her choice. She even inserted her head into the plank. Like,
it's the plank's fault because it didn't break.
God.
Yeah, it should have just moved out of her way.
Don't teach women not to do that. Teach planks not to plank.
Teach planks to respect women.
Like,
you're a victim blamer if you point all of that out. If you put a woman's actions back into the planking.
She had to nail the plank into the door frame. That's rape culture.
Oh my goodness, Prim. Okay, this dog is a menace. Okay, I'm gonna mute myself for a minute here.
I just want to try to get this back on topic, though.
Okay.
I don't even remember what the topic was.
It was planking. Planking.
All right, Hannah, what was the topic that we were? I know the overall topic, but how did we get on the digression of planking?
Well,
it was women are victims of
their
everything.
Own choices. Yeah, women as victims of everything, including their own choices. We'd gone on the tangent of women being victims of their own choices. Like, we did a show on this, so I think it's the one that we started out where I played the Knock-Up Fairy video. That one that narrative of victims, women as victims of their own choices, just blows my mind, right? Women have like 11 different types of birth control, of which they're apparently also victims. They are the gatekeepers of sex. Women are the ones who, if we say no, nobody's like, oh, you gay, oh, it's not, we don't get shamed for saying no to sex. Not publicly, not by society. And if a guy tries to shame us for saying no to sex, and we talk about him having done that, he gets shamed for his behavior. So we have that. We have the ability to abort, even whether it's something that you agree with or not, whether it's right or wrong, it's there. It's that ability. We have the ability to abort. We have the ability to use early abortion, the abortifacients. We have the ability to use surgical abortion. If we don't do that and we give birth, that's a choice. So we have all the birth control choices. We have whether or not to have sex, who you're going to have sex with, and all of that. Everything right up to
And
birth
safe haven
is a woman's
laws.
choice.
And safe haven laws.
Yeah, after birth we have 3 solid choices and some choices that maybe not everybody has access to, but there are 3 very solid choices. Custody can be relinquished to the father if he wants custody. If the father doesn't want custody and the mother doesn't want custody, it is legal to put your child up for adoption, and it is legal for a woman to take a child to a safe haven abandonment location and give the child up. These are all choices. These are all of these choices that a woman has. So a woman gets to single custodial motherhood. She's got custody of the child. She's a single parent. She's living in poverty. She goes on welfare. That's a choice. That is a lifestyle choice. There is no scenario in the United States or in Canada, or I think in the UK it's also legal to abort your child. There's no scenario there where being a mother who has custody of a child without being married, living by herself, living in poverty, being on welfare, there's no scenario where that's not a lifestyle choice made by the woman in question. And yet feminists portray women as victims of it.
There you go.
And I realized,
but if a man didn't want to be a father, he should have kept his dick in his pants.
even if it was taken out by somebody other than him and forcibly inserted into a fertile woman, he still should have kept it.
Or even if it was a fertilized embryo stolen from a fertility clinic, even if it was
stolen from a fertility clinic.
Or semen stolen or taken from a used condom, or semen taken from oral sex. All of these have resulted in the woman being granted child support. And the only judgment that of all of these scenarios that has been anywhere even remotely just, right, was that one fertility clinic, I believe it was in Germany, where the woman forged her husband's signature on the release documents, her ex-husband's signature on the release documents, intentionally got herself pregnant, right? Went after him for child support, and the court decided, actually, we think the people who should ultimately be held responsible for this woman's predicament are the doctors who own and operate the fertility clinic.
It's very rare. There's really one other one. There was one other one. There was a woman who stole semen from I don't remember whether it was a condom or she kept it in her mouth and impregnated
oral
herself.
Sex.
And initially,
they were both doctors.
Initially, it was the guy was ruled against. Initially, he was forced to pay child support, and then that was overturned later.
And the thing that really bothers me about that is that, like, even just by us bringing it up, like, people be like, "Oh, you're such a conspiracy theorist. That doesn't happen." And it's like, no, there are examples of this where it did happen.
Yeah, in my old set of bookmarks, I actually had a folder for, it was labeled sperm jacking, and for sperm jacking stories, because I would get feminists, especially on Reddit, this doesn't happen. This is an urban myth made up by men's rights activists to make women look bad. And then I would just post story after story after story after story. And then the answer was, you're just obsessed with women behaving badly stories.
Yeah, but it's not even about the women who do this.
No,
but they
it's
like to center it around.
It's about
them,
proving that it happens, and
no,
it needs to be addressed.
It's not even about proving that it happens. It's not about proving that it happens. It's not about, or that it's common, right? It could be like a 1 in a million freaking thing, or a 1 in 10 million thing, right? The fact is that when it does happen, and when it is when the woman literally sits in court and says, "Yes, I did this. Yes, I stole his fucking sperm from a used condom. Yes, I purchased it online," right? From some woman who wanted to screw over her ex-boyfriend. Yes, I fucking forged the signature on the release form to get myself impregnated, right? Yes, I committed this wrongful act, right? That when a woman does that, the man will have to fight tooth and nail at his own expense in a court of law to not be held responsible for her actions and for the existence of that child. And half the time, minimum, he will lose. And then he inherits a $100,000 baby mortgage because a woman decided to keep his semen in her mouth and give herself the turkey baster treatment later that night.
And this is what we're up against in terms of, so we want legal reform as a movement. We pretty much can all agree that there are areas of law that are egregiously, wrongfully discriminatory toward men and boys. And a lot of these have been legislative changes that were lobbied for on women's behalf that were never necessary and are actually harmful to both sexes and to children. But even if they weren't, even if all they did was cause harm to men, they would still be wrong. So we want to see these things happen. But to make these things happen, you can't just walk into a session of Congress and say, you know, stop attacking due process rights in women's name because you're hurting men. Because Congress will say, yeah, so, you know, or they'll throw you out. You could end up arrested. You can't just write to your legislator and get results if there is an entire societal outlook that says, yeah, it's okay to throw men away as long as we feel like we're benefiting women and children, or even just women. And so one of the things that we are here to do, as was described in the mission statement and as we talked about in the opening video, we have to change that tide. We have to change that social attitude. That does require, it's raising awareness. It does require talking about things in a manner that is different from the way people have been talking about, getting people thinking about things in a manner that is different from the way people have been thinking about them in the past, and waking people up to the fact that, hey, you realize you're talking about throwing away human beings, and in reality, for no genuine benefit.
Can I get... first of all, I wanted to actually thank you, Hannah, for your intro to this one. I really thought it was something special. It was so
thanks.
well done, and I love the way that you integrated the story in with the underpinning of why we created that mission statement. And I wanted to actually bring it back to why we got onto the topic of the women's victimhood, and it was because somebody said, I believe it was Karen said, Prim actually said that we get accused of being women hating, and it's of course because we recenter women's actions in the narrative. And that's, of course, there's a certain amount of blame that comes with that. There's a lot of responsibility, and there's a whole hell of a lot of empowerment that comes from it. It's painful, but once you recognize how your actions create your reality, you are now empowered to change your reality, period. It's the only way it happens, folks. You can't empower women by stripping them of all power over their lives, by reducing them down to victims of everything. The only way that's empowerment is if you can use that victimhood to motivate another person to save you, which means that you are reinforcing that gender role between men and women. But I digress. The reason why we got in on that is because Prim, I believe, said that we were seen as disliking women, and that's one of the reasons why we apparently don't get contract law upheld with us, because we're just so weird. Just so unique, just so bizarre, just so unable to accept that whole dynamic that women reduce themselves down to victims. That's empowerment, because then they can be saved by men. But, let's set that aside. But I wanted to address more of what Hannah was saying about the lawsuit. The lawsuit actually has done some positive things, in addition to setting the precedent that allows small businesses to bring injurious falsehood allegations to the provincial civil court of Alberta, and presumably across Canada. In addition to that, our lawsuit has apparently changed how the Calgary Expo approaches allegations of harassment. Now, if the operations manager is to be believed, he takes all the parties in and they talk about it. So there's an actual investigation that goes on now, as opposed to just kicking someone out based on an allegation alone. The other thing is that a friend of mine who's still in Calgary has informed me that they've taken down the cosplay is not consent signs and the zero tolerance signs. And most people would say, "Oh, you're horrible. You don't advocate. You hate victims of harassment." But those signs aren't about helping victims of harassment. They are about promoting a culture in which a harassment claim results in a unilateral action. Even if it's a false claim, there's no investigation. It's just you have someone claimed harassment against you, you're out. That's it. You're gone. You don't have any ability to appeal. You don't have any ability to tell your side of the story. You just have to leave. You're out. That is an abuse of power. It's a tremendous abuse of power, and I've been at the receiving end of that. I don't like it, and I don't want to ever see it with anybody else. So I'm actually really glad to see the Calgary Expo moving away from those kinds of draconian policies. And I can see why they'd be seductive to corporations and government, because those zero tolerance policies give them a lot of latitude over their customers and their citizens, a lot of power, a lot of moral imperium over them. But so we've seen those positive changes. And then there's another positive change that's a little bit Karen, help me.
Peripheral?
Peripheral. Thank you, Prim. Peripheral to when the red pill was being shown in Calgary. I remember reading a lot of the comments by the social justice warriors who were trying to get it shut down because they didn't want to see the stuff that we talk about. You know, the stuff that talks about how men can be victims of things, or at least can be vulnerable to things, and how women aren't necessarily always the vulnerable ones. So we sort of short circuit that narrative of, oh yeah, women always have to be reduced down to victims, and that's empowerment, because by being reduced down to a victim, you can appeal to some nebulous other that isn't a woman, but you know, that's not actually a man, because we don't want to say that because that sounds too much like traditional gender roles, but you can appeal to some nebulous outside force to save you. So we shortchange. I mean, the red pill basically contradicts that. So we had a whole bunch of protesters who didn't want to show the red pill. And I remember reading their comments, and one comment stated, "You know how litigious these men's rights activists are. We can't break, so you can understand why the theater that was originally going to show the film couldn't break its contract with them." So we are actually putting a little bit of the fear in the social justice and feminist community because of this lawsuit. And I mean, it's a legitimate fear. Yeah, you guys actually have to contend with our human rights. You have to contend with the rights that we have to contract law. You know, when you have contracts with us, you can't just break them because you don't like us, because you find us unaesthetic, because we're slutty women. That's what you actually mean when you say internalized misogyny. You're basically calling us slutty women. You don't like us in your proper society. Well, too bad. We're here.
It's interesting.
We're going to slut it up.
It's interesting that they were so openly willing to admit how underhanded their tactics for silencing the opposing viewpoints or viewpoints they disapproved actually are. And it's also interesting to see how quickly they figure out when someone is willing to fight back, when someone is willing to stand up for themselves and their rights, to stand up for the rights of their movement and their group and so on. It is very interesting to see how quickly they learn to take into consideration the risks that they face when they use those underhanded tactics.
Yeah, no kidding. Oh, we can't break contracts with these guys. We can't go back on our promises. They'll actually come out and defend themselves. That's terrible.
Yeah, we can't hit that guy. He'll hit back. We can't break the law and violate these people's rights because they'll defend themselves. It's a good thing to establish. You establish something like that, you force your detractors to deal with you on a more honest playing field. And they're not used to that. They don't fight honestly. It's not just not their MO. They're kind of allergic to it. And
Well, I think they're astounded at the idea that we could potentially have rights.
they're
with
astounded
the
at the idea that we
Nazis?
could force
The
them to be honest.
fascists?
They
The
really are.
sluts?
Yeah. And
They have rights?
yeah, and that is something that that's a you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube in that one, you know. That's something they're never going to undo, and it's because we're the first. We're not going to be the only people. We've stepped into the breach. Other people have seen how this particular battle can be fought, and they know it, and they know that since other people know how this particular battle can be fought, it will be fought again and again if they continue to try to use the same tactics.
Each time.
I'm gonna try catching up on some of our.
Can I just get one last thing about
you say one last thing, and then I'm gonna catch up on some of our
the
super
legal
chats.
the legal situation, and none of this requires actually a legal win. Just having fought back.
Yeah.
And made it extremely difficult for them to proceed. And I just wanted to say, this is why I don't get rid of our Patreon, because I'm not going to run. If Patreon brings the fight to me, I will enjoin the fight. I will. If they bring me a fight, I will fight it.
Yeah. Although my
And
understanding is they've
them...
stood up to social justice warriors to a degree.
Yeah, they stood up to social justice warriors to a degree, and there were only people who actually cared when one of our listeners was suicidal, and actually did anything to try to find him. So, and for that, I appreciate them quite a bit. So, but at the other hand, you know, like if they break a contract with me, I'm not going to lie down and take it. And I believe that we do need to fight back, because we have a right to these places as much as anyone else. We have a right to have our contracts respected and treated to be our word to be treated the same as everyone else's. There's nothing about us that makes us inferior, or why should we accept inferior treatment?
Exactly.
Right.
And you know, this is one of many things that a movement that you know, feminists turn around and say, well, you do nothing but talk. This is one of the many things that doing nothing but talking, by their standards, it accomplishes. You know, and the same type of patient hammering away, basically chiseling away at the misconceptions and at the barriers between us and other organizations and our society and social action, social activity, and legal action, legal activity. This is what is necessary. You know, it's the same as establishing that women are not victims of their own reproductive choices is necessary if we want to see widespread legislative reform in terms of equally shared parenting rights, and in terms of some kind of equal playing field when it comes to reproductive rights. Even though men and women are not going to be able to have all the same reproductive control capabilities, there are ways that, you know, we can both have equivalence. You know, these are all things that we have to fight for, and they don't necessarily involve buildings and writing legislation and contacting Congress and things like that. Sometimes they involve contacting your neighbor. Sometimes they involve just putting information on the internet. Sometimes, like I said, they involve talking about things in a way that is entirely different from what people are used to hearing in that particular topic. But I'm going to go on and catch up on we've got quite a few super chats, and I don't want to get too far behind, because this is one of the nights where the show has an ending point, you know, where we have to end at that ending point, because then I have to leave.
So send us any more super chats.
So we're asking you not to give us money. How bad is that? And then we just got a new one. French Honey Badger gave us US $5 and said meow. I'm guessing in response. Well, I did miss the first one. What was the first one?
Joe the Bull.
Oh, there we go. I didn't read up far enough. Joe the Bull gave us US $5 and said, talking about Rome when I am leading a Roman army, Not psychologist yet.
No, that was my post.
Oh, okay.
That was in response to what Karen was
She's
saying.
we didn't actually have you around, Prim, when
At the
Prim wrote
time.
that. Yeah. But
Yeah.
Prim is going to become a psychologist.
Oh, yay!
Yeah.
That'll be awesome. Then we have Tyler Preston gave us US $10 and said, this Big Joel YouTuber did a video on the Red Pill documentary that was nothing but dishonesty like The Project when they interviewed Cassie J. Ever heard of it? I will be honest, I have not, but he's not alone. A lot of them take their cues from David Futrell, who runs a blog that used to be called Man Boobs until he wanted to be taken a little more seriously, and now he calls it We Hunted the Mammoth, and it's actually an ironic joke because his We Hunted the Mammoth thing is based on there's an analogy feminists use about men talking about all of the things that men have done for society, because pretty much all of society wouldn't be here if it wasn't for men. We'd all still be living in grass huts. According who was the one that said that? Was that
Paglia?
Yeah, Paglia. Camille
Paglia.
Paglia. And she's right. If it wasn't for men, we would all still be living in grass huts. Feminists are like, well, we didn't ask you to do that for us. Women didn't ask you to do that for them. We didn't want it, and we don't have to appreciate it just because you did it for us. Well, women did ask for that, and it doesn't matter if feminists appreciate it or not, because a lot of the rest of us do. But in any case, he's advocating the female victim narrative, the feminist female victim narrative, in the name of women, against the will of most women who are not feminists and who do not buy the female victim narrative, and he expects to be appreciated for it. So it's kind of ironic that he calls his blog We Hunted the Mammoth, because he's, that mammoth hunter that brings home the big dead animal that the women didn't ask for, and demands to be as appreciated and esteemed for what he has done, that feminists describe in their little analogy there. But yeah, that's where those ideas come from, is David Futrell, and he's a little nuts, actually a lot nuts. If you look up, God, what was the name of the article? Judgy Bitch wrote a great article on the methodology of David Futrell, and she compared him to Canada's gay cannibal killer, and it actually makes quite a bit of sense. So I wouldn't take seriously anything that that David Futrell says, or anybody has based on anything he said, and in all honesty, you can pretty well argue back against it with ordinary logic. So my recommendation would be to go through that video. If you want to counter that video, go through that video, look for the logic fallacies, look for the shaming language, and call it out.
Oh, honestly, I think in large part, people can be pigeonholed a little bit using the quality of their commenters, and by essentially looking at their comment section and seeing what's actually there, right? Who are the most prolific commenters in the comment section? How insane are they, right? And how quickly do they go from being morally outraged and essentially screaming that the sky is falling to posting pictures of kittens? Because that's like, his comment section is surreal.
Oh my God, it's a mess, and
it's like these women go from like being absolutely batshit, radical, insane, militant people, right, to like one of them will post a meme, like a little GIF of Kevin Spacey from that House of Cards show, right? And then all of a sudden, the conversation's about House of Cards now. Yeah. And they're all like, oh my God, he's so hot, and all of this stuff, right?
It's absolutely insane.
And I love that show. And they are literally like, ooh, shiny, and then they're all in some other direction. Like they can't stay on point. Like the speed with which they shift gears from like being completely outraged to being like, oh my God, Kevin Spacey is so hot. Did you watch The Last House of Cards last week? Oh my God, it was really great. Right? and I'm like, what? Like, I just...
They say we have feminist attention deficit disorder, but we don't think, oh look, pecs. In any case, yeah, that's the sort of, that's where it comes from. And like I said, your best bet if you're going to go through that stuff and respond to it. And like not every idiot feminist on the internet deserves your attention and responses. And I know I don't always live up to this on Twitter. Sometimes I have massive knockdown dragouts with troll accounts with like one follower. But some of them, you can identify them as paid trolls in the beginning, and it's fun to get one over on the professionals. So I do sometimes. But in any case, like not every single one of these people deserves a response. You can end up Streisand affecting them, where they get more attention from the rest of the internet than they deserve because you've responded to them. But if you are going to respond to somebody like this, the tools that we've been discussing, laying out, you look for those logic fallacies, you look for those that nasty shaming language, you call those things out, you counter their arguments with facts and logic and reason, and they're going to look like idiots if they try to respond with a bunch of emotional drivel. And generally speaking, that is exactly what they will do. You can almost guarantee that if you respond to something like this with facts and logic and reason, they will respond to it with a bunch of emotional drivel, and they will call it facts and logic and reason. And anybody that has so much as half a brain, if not more, and sees that is going to realize that you are dealing with an idiot and you are right. And it will influence the way people think.
I'm just wondering now what our commentators say about us.
Oh gosh, we get good and bad. I've seen good and bad. I've got somebody on an anti-feminist website accusing me of promoting pedohysteria because I don't agree that 11-year-olds can consent to sex.
What?
Yeah, so if you want to call that, well, they're actually they're kind of pissing on oh shoot, he passed away, and all I can think of is there was an article on his site talking about how it's not pedophilia to look at pictures of adult women who are still in their adolescent years. So a 19-year-old or a 20-year-old, it's not pedophilia to look at those pictures, and targeting men who look at those pictures and accusing them of pedophilia is hysteria. And
that sounds a little bit hysterical.
Yeah, and so my statement that an 11-year-old cannot consent to sex, and an 11-year-old who is screaming and crying and saying no, did not consent to sex, is equal to saying that you're a pedophile if you look at pictures of 20-year-olds and are turned on by pictures of 20-year-olds. They don't want to argue honestly at that point. So we get some weird shit, just absolute weird shit. And yeah,
and crabbiness.
Lots of
crabbiness.
Of course,
it's
hard to escape that in this field, I think.
Oh yeah.
Well, honestly, here's the thing, right?
Angry Harry.
There you go. When I'm describing the commenters on Futrell's blog, right? I'm describing the commenters who love him, who have their tongues so far inserted up his butt that, like, literally he has two tongues poking out of his mouth. Okay? These are feminists who absolutely adore him, and yet they spend 90% of their time in his comment section talking about their cats, posting pictures of their cats, posting GIFs, talking about different shows that they're watching, discussing Game of Thrones and House of Cards and all of that stuff. and just being generally kind of like I don't know what they're jumping around like fucking Higgs bosons in a fucking magnetic storm, right? They're all over the place. But these aren't women who are complaining about, you know, they don't like what he's doing, right? Or they don't like how he does it. No, they love him. They love him. These are his fans. Super sycophantic fans, right? Now, the complaints in our comment section generally don't come from fans.
Actually, they do. But the thing is that, okay, I've had these exchanges with somebody who gets sort of shirty about something. I don't even remember this particular exchange. I just know that he got shirty, I got shirty, we got into an argument, and then he said, "Fine, I'll donate." I'm like, "Okay." And then he donated $200. I'm like, "Well, thank you." So this is obviously this was a supporter of some kind in Stripe, but we get a lot of. I agree with about 70% of what you say. That other 30% is garbage. Garbage.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. Well, but when that's your comment section, that's actually a good thing.
Yeah, I know. I'd rather have commentators that agree with 70% of what I say, but disagree with 30%, or commentators who say, you know, I don't know if I entirely agree, but this has made me think, than I would a bunch of yes men or women all nodding in unison.
Yeah, for sure. It's nice to have that kind of discussion on your videos. I know I love that when I get that on mine.
Mm-hmm. And then nodding like mad, and then switching the topic to like what happened on Orange is the New Black.
Yeah, because they don't really care about what he's saying. They just he's just delivering he's like the drug pusher. He delivers the hit, then you get the fuck out. Don't even come into the house from the front door. Come to the house from the back door. And come at night so people, the neighbors don't see you. That's their real relationship with him.
Yeah.
It's very weird.
It's sad, actually. Gosh, poor man boobs.
Just before we had moved on to the next super chat, I just wanted to point out that we skipped 2 of them.
Yeah, I was just noticing that. I copied them and pasted them into a text file so that I could read them without having to scroll through all of the text in our chat. And I don't think I copied them in the right order, but that's all right. We have the next one is Hoki Bukisa gave us US $20 and said HBR inspires courage, spines shot lights on neglected and sacrosanct topics. I always do that. I get that word backwards for some reason. Says what we can, lets us know that we aren't alone, and provides a place for us to congregate, vent, and share. You're much more than a charity.
Can I just say, Karen, if you're gonna disembowel and skin the moose, could you just
sorry, I just realized I wasn't muted. God, but I'm like,
I was just like you're throwing a body around.
No,
really
I was
yeah,
literally
it's really good Wendy's.
I ate half.
This is like half. When we answer, "I love you, man," with "You're not getting my Bud Light."
I ate half my Frosty. And then I just got up to put the other half of it in the freezer.
This is exactly what I wanted to hear about what you ate when I was calling you out for dragging a body around your living room floor.
It was just a Frosty.
I don't care if you drag that body around your living room floor. Just put your damn mic on.
It was
off,
Frosty.
off you mean?
Off. Yes, there we go.
On.
Yes,
you button on, mic off.
And we can hear Karen miking off. And Hoki Bukisa, thank you very much for that wonderful statement.
I was licking the lid of my Frosty, and
things I don't care about.
I cut my tongue on it.
Still don't care.
Oh, no.
Everybody in the audience is cringing now. Everybody that's ever cut their tongue on anything.
How did you? Okay, no, I don't want the story. Continue.
It's plastic. It's thin plastic.
Thin plastic. We'll do that. French Honey Badger gave us US $5 and says, "To be fair, roads trigger me a lot."
Well, all roads lead to Rome.
Well, no,
all
Ancapistanians are triggered by mention of roads, and all Ancapistanians know why. But I'm not going to explain the joke.
You need a large sippy cup.
Yes, there we
Can't
go.
be trusted with thin plastic.
What?
Oh, good grief. Now we're going to get
Okay,
super
everyone,
chats to buy
new
Karen a
fundraiser.
sippy
The Money Badgers
Now,
have a new
now you're
goal.
going to make fun of me because
plastic sippy cut for Karen. Plastic,
you're gonna
make it happen.
No,
you're
no,
gonna
no.
make fun of me when I'm injured. Really?
You don't use a sippy cup when
Wow,
you're an
it
adult.
seems like
you
what
get one of those
injured?
hats that you fit the drink cans in the sides of the hat, and it has a straw
A
that goes up.
frosty is not.
Those are,
a
that's what
frosty
you
is
get as
not
an
a
adult.
A straw beverage.
A frosty is not a drink.
Okay, but
That
here,
is true.
Karen, if you're injured, the part that you've injured still seems to work a lot.
Yeah, I know. You know why? Because I know how to play through the pain, Alison. I know how to rub a little dirt in it and
Well,
carry
You're
on.
rubbing dirt on your tongue.
You're deprived anyway. Y'all are deprived.
I know how to walk it off. I know how to walk it off, and I know how to talk it off. So
Wait, you're deprived anyway. You're totally deprived because you're eating Wendy's, which is a sad. As much as I hate to say it, it's a sad, sorry imitation of the original Kewpie. And I can't even eat Wendy's because
You can't even.
No.
Can't even.
If you ever go to Michigan, I believe there's one in Lansing and one in Racine. The ones I grew up with are in Lima, Ohio. If you're ever in Lima, Ohio, and you don't get a Kewpie, you're missing out. Unless you're a vegetarian, in which case it's excusable.
You're already
but
missing
shame
out.
on anybody who visits Lima, Ohio, and does not get a Kewpie. And that's not that they don't pay us. They're not associated with us or anything. I just really, really love their food.
all I know is
I
this
can't
is what
eat
my
Wendy's.
boys wanted. This is what my boys wanted for skip the dishes for dinner tonight, and I thought, okay, I can get a frosty.
Yes,
So
well,
I'm willing to go along with it.
There you go. You get your
now we
machine
need-
Frosty. Tyler Preston
And-
gave us US $10, and we already read that one. I've skipped back up the page. See what you made me do? I was waving my hands around so much I hit the mouse. Let's see.
Okay,
we
sex.
went to
We're on the sex
Cyberberserk.
one,
Yes,
but-
we got to get to the sex. Always got to get to the sex in this show. Cyberberserk gave us 100 sex and said,
That's a lot
I
of
just
sex.
wanted to send you guys some sex. Thanks for the great work. And then he gave us 4 or 5 kissing hearts, which are adorable. In the text of my page here, it just calls them kissing hearts, but they're cute little kissy faces. The Spencer Fencer gave us US $5 and said, there is also the time when a woman cheated with her husband's identical twin brother, and she couldn't prove which man's the child was. Damn broad. How the hell did they find out she cheated? I
Karen.
guess somebody walked in on somebody.
You spoke my name.
I forget. I was gonna make fun of you.
Oh. Okay.
Oh.
Well.
No, I was gonna say you have too much sex already.
Oh,
I
dear.
do?
There is no
Yeah.
such thing.
No, I'm actually a little baffled by that statement. It doesn't make any kind of sense. So I'm just gonna let's go on to the next super chat.
Yeah. Let's see. We have Rico Champagne gave us Canadian $5 Canadian, said devil's advocate. But if that one victim isn't held responsible, then all society taxpayers are held collectively responsible and pays anyway. Well, that doesn't have to be the case. I mean, if you're talking about welfare, well, there's a couple of things to note there. When the state goes after a man for child support, they spend more money going after him most of the time than they collect. It's not cost effective. So the taxpayers, all of society, are going to pay one way or another because the government doesn't do things cheaply. You buy a hammer and you might pay 20 or 30 bucks for it. The government buys a hammer, they might pay 20 or 30,000 for it. And then they're not using it for the correct purpose. They buy a hammer and they write into legislation that the hammer must be hung on the wall next to the license to use the hammer and kept there at all times. That's how the government does things. So
Yeah, it's
thinking
the
that
only-
you can solve the problem of welfare moms by going after dads for child support is backward. What you need to do is take away the cushion that welfare moms have. Basically say, all right, we are not going to support your lifestyle choices. You can get help getting back to work. You can get help, getting yourself under control, whatever. But we are not going to pay you to pop out babies and do nothing. And that would be a solution. But people can't do that because they feel like, they're being cruel to the mother and the children, and it's not cruel to hold people accountable for their own choices.
That's putting responsibility on them.
Exactly.
Yeah, I know. I do want to say that there is some profit to be made in child support, but it's actually a kickback scheme from the federal government. It's Title 4D or something like that.
Yeah, the states make a profit.
The state governments are in charge of child support enforcement. They are the ones who go and collect the money. Even if it costs them $550 to collect that $500 from that guy, right? They're receiving another $500 from the federal government, a dollar for dollar kickback from the federal government to the state in order to, And
you know what Ohio did when that legislation went through? They made it mandatory so that all child support now has to be paid through the state. You cannot write a check to your ex-wife to pay your child support and keep that as proof that you paid your child support. That's a gift. The state does not count that as child support. If you don't send it to the Child Support Enforcement Agency, or the Child Support Enforcement Agency does not garnish your wages, and you actually would have to fight tooth and nail for them to not garner your wages. So they actually set it up so that they have an automatic system that activates as Title 9-4D. Robert Smith put it in the chat, and he's correct. That activates that, and they get paid to collect child support from men who were already paying their child support. And the worst thing about it is, in addition to the great bureaucracy that has expanded, and the damage that has done financially, it also led to Ohio making that apply retroactively. So the full year prior to it going into effect, men who had paid their child support were considered to be in arrears. That hit my husband. That hit my husband at the worst possible time for it to hit us, actually. And he was suddenly a year in arrears over child support that he had paid and could prove that he paid, because according to the state, if the ex-wife doesn't come in with a letter that says this was child support, and the state doesn't approve her statement that this was child support, it wasn't child support, even if it was when he paid it. And they got all kinds of money from the government for that, and from the federal government for that. And the majority, it may be very, very true that the majority of men that were hit with it were not in arrears at all prior to the passage of that law. That is how the state supposedly solves the problem of welfare mothers costing. And it didn't reduce the women on welfare. It didn't reduce these moms' reliance on welfare. And it didn't get back a bunch of money for the welfare system. All it did was create a road for federal dollars to go to the states.
And I know a guy in British Columbia who he agreed with his ex to pay her a certain amount of support for, I guess, 5 years or 6 years or something like that after they split up, and it was a significant amount, and it was a spouse the agreement that they wrote up and had notarized. And then he went and tried to file his taxes and claim it on his taxes, and Canada Revenue Agency said, no, you can't claim this on your taxes. Not because spousal support can't be claimed, because I think child support can't be claimed, but spousal support still can. But because you didn't file this with the court. A judge didn't bang his gavel over it. Yes, it's a legal document. It's a contract. It's been notarized. It's been signed by both of you. But it doesn't count, right? So he's essentially being his money is being garnished in terms of She's come after him for arrears. She's come after him for all kinds of stuff. His income is being his spousal and child support are set based on his gross income from the last year without any consideration for the fact that he's paid all of this spousal support.
What's odd about this?
Crazy situation.
There was a system prior to the welfare system. There was a system in place. If you've ever played Monopoly, you're familiar with the term community chest. Well, a community chest was a real thing. It actually funded a large number of different charities. Back in the 40s, there was I don't know if everybody knows who Mickey Rooney is. If everybody knows who Mickey Rooney is, that he did a bunch of film shorts and movies and stuff with a character called Andy Hardy. There was a short back in the 40s promoting the community chest that played on the movie channel once when I was a young mom. Although I was never a young mom, I had my son at 27 years old. So, but in any case, when he was a little kid, and I'm watching this, and I started out. I made bad choices starting out and made our lives harder than they needed to be. And I'm looking at, like, the one thing I really, really didn't want to do was go on welfare. I didn't want welfare cash, I didn't want food stamps, I didn't want Medicaid, and I was facing disability at the time. And at the time, we thought my injuries from a car accident were worse than they actually ended up being. So it looked to me like my earning capacity had been permanently damaged, and so I got my choices were limited, and I got talked into, hey, you've paid into this for years. This is what it's for. You're using it correctly if you use it. And I went through the minimum of things that we could use without becoming permanently reliant on the government. And it was a tooth and nail fight to not at that point become permanently reliant on the government. So I see this short, and one of the charities that the community chest gave to was a charity that helped women who have made bad choices, who end up, because of their bad choices, they have become pregnant, and they keep their children, and they want to become self-sufficient. They want to get jobs and support their children, and so on. And that charity, I couldn't find it. It didn't exist anymore when I was a young mom. It didn't exist anymore because who donates to stuff like that when there's a welfare system? This is where we have ended up. So my personal thoughts on this, and this isn't, I'm not going to claim that Honey Badger Radio endorses this. This is just, I've worked through this mentally on my own, looking at my situation and the situations of other women I've known who've made similar bad choices to mine, and lived out the consequences and results of those choices, and like me, fought tooth and nail to keep those consequences from falling on their children. If you want to see the single motherhood dilemma as solved as best as that it can be solved, you let local communities work with that. You let people who know the women, people who care about their neighbors, people who want to see their community be successful, help those women to become self-sufficient. You don't give them a giant burgeoning welfare system and a giant burgeoning bureaucracy to try to solve every single one as if they are all in the same situation, because they're not. Some of us have capabilities that some of the other ones don't. Some are more physically handicapped. Some of them are in a situation where they have zero job skills and need job training. Some have job skills and simply need somebody to say, hey, get off your ass and go apply for those jobs. You can do this. And, it's a totally different situation than it's being treated by our massive government. And if we were able to go back to a situation where there were local organizations addressing the problem, and get the government out of being the single mom support system, get the government out of child support enforcement, get the government out of interfering with families, we may see a significant solution to the problem just from all of that. But once again, talking about these things from the angle of all of these feel-good insta-fixes don't work, let's try something new, what label gets applied? Your knees are soggy. You're misogynist. You hate women. You hate mothers. You hate children. You don't want to solve the problems. You want to punish people for getting pregnant. No. I don't want to cut people's legs off at the knees for getting pregnant. So that's my spiel on the whole. We talk about the child support system as a means of protecting the government, but the reality is it's nothing but support for additional bureaucracy. It's an excuse for more government jobs, plain and simple. Let's see. Oh, and we got another one. Let's go on with the next one.
Okay, this one was Rico Champagne, right?
Well, no.
Now we've got Tyler Preston.
Yes. Gave us US $5 and said, at this point, humanity is far beyond saving. So we need to start Ragnarok in order to get a fresh new start. And I don't agree with that. Society has been in worse shape than it is now. I mean, for instance, most of the
Bronze
world...
Age.
Well, yeah, most of the world at one
Dark
point...
Age out of bronze, after bronze, I guess.
Yeah, most of the world at one point thought that it was perfectly okay and acceptable and a human right if you went to war with another tribe or another country, another community, whatever, and you conquered them, that you took all of the people in that community, and you killed off the ones that were most likely to resist successfully, and you enslaved the rest. That was socially acceptable throughout pretty much the entire world, the entire civilized world at one point. It was socially acceptable throughout pretty much the entire world at one point to cut off body parts for the commission of crimes that we now consider petty.
You don't want to... Oh, sorry.
It was socially acceptable throughout almost the entire world at one point that if an individual committed a capital offense, to make their death as painful and torturous as possible and to bring people out to be entertained by it.
Yeah, we don't want to make it seem like everything is beyond saving. Otherwise, a lot of people will just see it as a lost cause and won't even try. Honestly, I think that thinking that we can't fix it is more detrimental than thinking, some things are pretty messed up, but we can still work to try and combat them. Because if we don't try, then nothing's going to get any better and it's just going to keep getting worse. But we still can try.
And we've had multiple world wars too.
Yeah, but the idea that just sit back, wait for the collapse, and then everything will reset. That's actually that's a fool's hope, because things won't reset. Right now, we have to drill, in some cases, kilometers deep into the earth to get at the oil, because we got all of the easy oil, we got all of the easy coal, we already extracted all of the easy minerals, and so essentially Blithering Genius, he's on YouTube. He's a complete autist and very smart, but a little weird. But he described it as we climbed up a ladder of easy coal and oil, and then we kicked the ladder out. And so if we fall down onto the ground, we're not getting back up where we are now.
Yeah,
it's just not going to happen.
And it's not really necessary to do it either, because what we've basically got here is a situation where our society has evolved repeatedly for centuries and centuries. It would go small step, small step, small step, giant gaping leap, small step, small step, small step, giant gaping leap, and it's almost those giant gaping leaps. In a lot of terms, they're a lot like a societal flip almost. We get to the point where people have these realizations that, holy shit, we've been doing something really bad or really stupid or really unnecessary, and then they figure as a society, and it's a lot of times it's a painful change. Sometimes it's been bloody revolutions, and sometimes it's simply been epiphanies that people come across after natural disasters and things like that. But the fact of the matter is, we have had social and societal evolution throughout humanity's history, and that needs to continue. There are still things to learn. We are still learning things. We are still growing as a species in ways that, that's not going to end. And, as much as it feels natural to just look at the size of the task ahead of us and give up, you just do with it what you do with any big task. You break it down into smaller tasks and you tackle them individually, and surprise, you get to a point where you've accomplished a lot more than you really thought you would. And I would liken it to cleaning up a kitchen that's been neglected for a month. Not that I've done that very frequently, but I do now. And, you start with one area and you're like, well, I'm just going to get this little area clean and I'll address the rest later. Well, I got that area clean. I'm going to just get this little area and I'm just going to take care of the dishes. I'm just going to take care of the stove. I'm just going to take care of the floor. And yeah, it's going to be messy. It's going to be hard. It's going to be a lot of work. But it doesn't all have to happen at once. And we don't have to look at it all at once and assume that we can't do anything because we can't get it done all at once. Just the same way as, we don't stop talking about issues regarding abuse victims, and abuse victim services and the lack of services for men and everything, because we cannot, right at this moment, fully fund and run a shelter that will serve all of the men that are being cut out of those services. And because, well, what men need might have some differences from what women need. We don't give up because it's hard. That just means everybody that is aware is more responsible for not giving up, because there are too many other people who will.
And not giving up makes us not the victims.
Yeah, not giving up makes us not the victims. So I don't like the idea of saying, yeah, we got to give up and start over again. No, we don't have to give up and start over again. We just have to light a fire under our asses, and get our asses in gear and get her done. And get her done a little at a time. Get her done a statement at a time, a conversation at a time, and an article at a time, a video at a time. That's what we have to do. Maybe a lawsuit at a time, maybe a lobbying effort at a time. Just depending on what each individual task within the greater effort to change things needs to be. One starfish at a time.
Yeah, or one starfish catapult at a time.
Exactly. Build yourself one invention at a time.
Yeah, a robot that scoops starfishes and catapults it into the sea.
Yep.
Well, when I was looking at these issues, and it was actually a process to come and arrive at the idea of Honey Badger Radio. I listened before I did this. I did a bunch of other things, including being in a student-run organization, which is how I ended up in the Canadian Association of Students. And one of the things that I picked up from there, because we did like a lot of leadership seminars and management and stuff, and it was sort of like a youth leader development, although I was hardly a youth leader. I was pretty marginal. But regardless, one of the things that I learned from that whole experience is that you can't do everything. I went into student government, and what ended up happening is the president was a stoner. The operations manager was also a stoner. They did almost nothing, and I ended up taking over almost all the jobs that they weren't doing, and I nearly killed myself. And the next time around, I decided just to focus on my job. Well, actually, the next time around, I still did the same thing, and it took a couple times for that lesson to sink in. But eventually, I learned, and somebody actually said, "Focus on what you do and do your job." You know what it was? It was during a convention, and I apologize that this is all broken up, but it was during a convention. Someone who had put on lots of different fan conventions gave me this piece of advice. Do not do other people's jobs for them. Do your job the best you can. Let these other people figure out their own jobs, let them do their own jobs, and you will find out that if you focus on your own job and you do it the very best you can, it'll actually bring other people to your level. So they'll start doing the very best job that they can, or at least a decent or adequate job. So don't take over other people's tasks. Just do your job the best you can. And that's sort of the mentality that I eventually, Honey Badger Radio evolved out of. I went through a process of deciding what I could and couldn't do. Can I create a men's shelter? No, I can't. Can I do this? No, I can't. Can I create a men's helpline? No, I can't. Can I do all of these other things? Nope, I can't do that. But I can talk and I can create art, and I guess I can manage a little bit. So, Honey Badger Radio, it basically came out of me deciding what is the thing that I can do and do it well, and not worry about the people doing where that'll be somebody else's task to create the men's shelter or the men's helpline or whatever else, other resource, brick and mortar resource that men need, or it'll be somebody else's task to deal with the legislation and to do those kinds of lawsuits, somebody else's task to intervene to help men who are going through these kinds of legal procedures. And this is how I proceeded to this state is I guess some people might kind of find it depressing, but just deciding what you can't do versus what you can, and then just doing it the best you can.
That's kind of the formula behind a lot of people's greatness, and is they eliminate the extraneous stuff, the stuff that is pipe dreams, the stuff that is not going to get them where they need to go, and they focus on the things they can achieve, break them down into tasks, and work on them. And that's how actually the teacher who I had for English Lit in, I believe, the 7th grade. I had in junior high, it's been a long time ago for me. I had a teacher who was in a wheelchair because she had polio when she was 10 years old. She totally lost the use of her legs. She almost entirely lost the use of one hand, and she had limited but fairly good use of the other. And she went to university. She got her teaching degree. She handled the toughest age group of students to handle. They're at the beginning of their adolescence. They got more wiggles than kids of any other age, and odder ones at that. And they're rebellious, they're creative, they're this is the group of kids that will test you. They're second only to kindergartners, and that they'll test you harder than any other group of kids that you want to teach. And she never had big problems in her classroom. She kept discipline. She taught us what the subject matter dictated that she taught us, and everything worked out just fine because she did things her way. She did things in a way that worked for, her limitations. She used her assets. She was an amazingly smart woman. And she was tough. She was a tough lady. And actually, she's one of my inspirations because, you know, it's a lot of bullshit to turn around and say, I can't do this, I can't do that, in the presence of somebody who went through university before the Americans with Disabilities Act, in a wheelchair that somebody else had to push because it was before electric wheelchairs were widely available, and throughout her entire life, she drove a vehicle that was modified for her to use a joystick like you would use if you were playing a video game, and everything. She did not accept not being able to do the big things that she wanted to do, because there were aspects related to those big things that were not accessible to her. She found ways to get things done, and she did it by knowing her limitations, knowing how to divide her activities and her attention, and by toughing things out when she had to tough things out. That's what we do, and that's what the movement's gonna have to do. So, yeah, we don't give up. Giving up is not an option.
The other thing I wanted to talk about is when I was talking about a Council of Kings, whenever you resolve something like this, a problem like this, you inevitably get a boon from it. You know, it's like the gold coins when you beat the level sort of thing, or the points.
Yeah, you do. You get a lot of a boon. You don't give up. So, you shape yourself differently than you would have otherwise.
Yes. It's you get something out of dealing with these kinds of issues. You get growth out of it. That's what I mean about with the metaphor of the Council of Kings. If we face these issues and if we overcome them, the end result will be something valuable, something worth having, and something that exalts us as human beings.
Definitely.
So I think it's worth it to get into the fray and try to solve these issues.
All right,
we still got We've got two more super chats I'm going to read. Frenchinator 2 gave us US $5 and says, I ate at Arby's because I have not had violent diarrhea today. Yay!
There was actually another one.
Oh, God.
I just want to say, operative word, Frenchinator 2, is yet.
Yet.
Well, you know.
Violent diarrhea yet today.
Yeah, that's not limited to Arby's. I have that issue with most fast food
don't
places.
Worry, Prim. Don't worry, we're not missing Critterman.
Okay.
Critterman. $5, some shekels to support this force for good. Thank you.
And French Honey Badger also gave us US $5 and said, note that the world wars were not tribal but statist, i.e. people didn't care much, but was propagandized into jumping into the meat grinder. And they were. That was one of those areas, one of those instances where male disposability was a huge factor in that getting us involved in these wars. The fact that people were willing to accept a draft in the United States that men would sacrifice their lives because the government said they were going off to fight for their country.
I think honestly, the First World War more so than the Second, I think on both sides, seem to have, like, does anybody actually know what the First World War was about? Some politician got shot and then, like, we threw, like, 10 million men into a fucking meat grinder? Like, what?
Well, and see, that's the other thing. The United States really didn't have to be involved. We never really had to get involved. And if you don't believe me, the book I would recommend looking at is Wilson's War, how Woodrow Wilson's great blunder led to Hitler, Lenin. It's a long title, but that should, if you just search that part, how Wilson's great blunder led to Hitler, Lenin, you will find a book that will, if you think the United States ever belonged in World War I, it'll change your perspective. You might not entirely change your mind, but it'll definitely change your perspective. And yeah, it was Wilson's blunder. Wilson made that decision.
Hokey Bokisa gives us 105. I just want to ask Koki Bukisa something. Why the strange...
Why do the weird numbers happen?
Yeah, 105. Is it that 5 cents? Did you want it to go to someone in particular? The nickel? Like, you want to specify. The nickel goes to Karen, or the nickel goes to Karen's dog, or the
I'm
nickel
guessing it's
goes
just
to
for
the.
the.
I'll
I'm
throw
guessing
it
it's
in her
just for the
head.
yucks of having us say the extra cents.
It's
he
not a
says-
wooden
yeah.
nickel, is it?
Freedom
You
costs
wouldn't do that, right?
105. Freedom costs, but the thing is that you actually do quite a few different weird numbers, like the 499. What the hell?
Well, I know what the 420
I had somebody donate me 2 cents on my Patreon with the comment, "Stop saying the twatter," in all caps, and I was like, "All right,
awesome.
I guess he gave me his 2 cents."
Oh my God.
That's his 2 cents.
So yeah,
That's amazing.
Stop saying the twatter. And
Well,
yeah.
And you didn't, did you? Stop saying
No,
the twatter.
well,
I
I
wouldn't.
don't say it all the time. I don't
Yeah.
say it all the time, but I say it sometimes.
Well, and with that, we have given you our 2 cents, and you have given us quite a bit. We've had numerous super chats tonight.
2
Especially
cents, and
several of
2
which came
hours.
in after Allison asked you to stop. We can't stop.
But
people
thank
from
you
doing
anyway.
that.
Now you absolutely cannot give us any further super chats because we must go
away.
We
so
must
I
away.
thank everybody for the wonderful super chats and all of the input, all the comments that we got. Some of the comments we got that were great were not necessarily super chats, and it's nice to be able to include them all in the video. I'd like to thank my co-hosts for being patient with how long the show got. We still had a 2-hour-long sausage here. And especially, I would like to thank everybody behind the scenes that's involved in making Badger Talk happen. There's quite a number of people involved in that, and a lot of volunteers, and they work very hard. And I want to thank everybody for listening. And I'm going to pass the mic, the invisible mic, across the border without any border checks to Allison, and Allison can shill.
Okay, yes, I shall do.
Allison shall shill.
I shall. I shall shill by the seashore.
Yes.
I shall shill the she's. I shall shill the. I shall shill.
Now we just messed it up.
She shills starfish down by the seashore.
She shills seashells down
shills
by the shill shore.
Yes.
She shills seashells by the seashore. That's even worse than the original.
Yes, and now we have a shill kebab, so go ahead.
Okay, all right, yeah, okay. So I think that when I was talking about this idea of this Council of Kings, we can take this kind of despair and this sense of subjugation, and by facing our shadow and facing these problems, we can turn it into a wisdom that exalts us all. It actually elevates the human race. And I've seen it happen before in history, and there's no reason why it can't happen again. And that's definitely what I want to bring about. And if you also want to help bring that about, point your browser to www.feedthebadger.com and put a few shekels in the hat, because it all helps to bring us closer and bring more content to you. All right, there we go.
And with that, we will bid you all good night.
She shells, seashells.